I actually will just go ahead and start. So my name is Selena. I'm former 8th grade ELA teacher, instructional coach. I taught in Dallas ISD. Hi to all my Dallas folks, friends who are here. And we feel super excited to have Peter here with us. So Peter's a former K-5 teacher, and I'll definitely let you, Peter, tell a little bit about yourself, but spent some time as a principal as well, and you've mostly been facilitating professional learning nationally, internationally. So we're super grateful to have you here. Anything you want to add there?
No, thank you. I'm grateful that you would have me here. I know you have a lot of choices, so thanks for choosing me. And I've known Jeremy for a long time. I remember when you were just starting this whole thing, so it's just nice to be reunited. But yeah, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining me. I'm Peter Dewitt. I did teach for 11 years in some high poverty city schools in New York State, and then I was a principal for 8 years. And for almost 10 years now, I've been facilitating workshops and doing a lot of coaching of school leaders. That would be about 60% of the work that I do. And I've written books. De-Implementation is a really interesting book. It came out last year, actually. It's been out almost a year. And not only was the topic interesting to just research and focus on and create, but it's been pretty eye-opening with people's perspectives around de-implementation and the abandonment of low-value practices just over the past year, from talking to people and what they want to abandon and what they don't actually focus on abandoning either. So thank you for being here.
So tell me a little bit about that, right? For folks on the call who are not used to this term, especially working in schools, right? We often tend to add more things to our plates. What is de-implementation? How did you come to thinking more about this?
Yeah, sometimes I worry, though. I will say that maybe sometimes I'm going to say decluttering instead of de-implementation, because I feel like when I say de-implementation over and over, it sounds like a drinking game where you're supposed to do a shot every time I say it. But so John Hattie, a researcher out of Melbourne, Australia, he actually introduced me to the concept. We were talking a few years ago, and he sent me research, and it was from the medical field from about 2017. And the definition is the abandonment of low-value practices. And that, to me, just like when we were talking about the Katy Perry song, when we were leading in, it was like an earworm, and it really was for me. When he had sent that to me and I started reading the research, it just was something that I couldn't get out of my mind, because I'd also been coaching leaders who talked about how their workload was increasing. I was reading and writing for Ed Week a lot about well-being and social emotional learning and all of those kind of things. And I thought, this is just a piece that we really have to honor and start talking about more. So coming down to it, the basic definition is the abandonment of low-value practices. Then there are a lot of questions that follow that.
Yeah, I guess my first one is, who determines what's a low-value practice and what is that?
Lena, that's perfect. It was like, we didn't even set it up that way.
I know.
So there's actually research from Farmer out of Canada at about 2020, 2021. So right around the time that I started to write the book, where Farmer and started to look at what does low value practice, what does that mean? What's the criteria? And what it really comes down to is 4 areas. It's really looking at, maybe this just isn't effective anymore. We found something that's more effective than the practice that we were using. In one of the cases, the criteria was that it actually causes harm. So you can think about things like zero tolerance policies. The research is not favorable to zero tolerance policies, actually has shown that they can be highly discriminatory. And in those cases, they cause harm. And the 4th criteria is just that it's just not needed anymore. And I remember I was running a workshop, a full-day workshop in South Carolina, and I was coming up with the idea of, how do I get people to understand what is something you don't need anymore? And it was a couple of years ago, and I ended up saying contact tracing, and the whole audience, it was a collective groan, because a lot of them were responsible for doing contact tracing. And I said, that was something that you were knee-deep into during COVID. And then all of a sudden you didn't have to do it anymore. So that's just something that you can abandon because it's just no longer necessary. So that's the criteria behind what a low value practice is. But in the book, And one of the things that I created, and I've never created one before, but it was a checklist. It's called a de-implementation checklist. And the checklist really goes through, is this a formal de-implementation? And these are things that I created around it, because when I was doing the research, I kept thinking, yeah, this is going to be really complicated for schools to be able to do. I just know that it's just not something that they're going to be used to doing, because as you said, Selena, they're used to piling things on, not taking things off. So one of the things that I started to do was look and say, so what are different ways we can look at this whole idea of the decluttering, the de-implementation? One is a formal process, which means you need a team. You're changing your grading practices from traditional grading to standards-based grading. You're going from zero tolerance policies to more equitable practices like restorative justice. That's not something you can do overnight. And that's a formal process, because you need time to pilot and what does it look like and gather resources. So that's where I have a de-implementation checklist, where is this a formal de-implementation? And then you go through the 4 criteria. Are you finding a strategy that's more effective than the one that you're using? The other way to look at it is what I refer to as an informal de-implementation. I can wake up tomorrow morning and I can do this in my classroom in school, and I don't need permission. And there are lots of ways to be able to look at that whole kind of informal de-implementation. I've had teachers, I've been able to collect, research over the past couple of years, but I've had teachers say, I don't want to give as many assessments anymore because I don't do anything with them. So I'm going to partially reduce the number of assessments that I give. I've had leaders say, you know what, we meet too much. So let's focus on creating a meeting space where we can be more in depth and we can be more impactful, but maybe we don't have to meet as much. Other people are saying, you know what, I check my email because we all have our phones next to us all the time. I'm sick of checking my email a bazillion times a day. So an informal de-implementation is, I'm actually going to hold myself to setting up a routine where maybe I only check my email 3 or 4 times during the day. So that's the way that I started to look at, how do you take that abandonment of low value practice from the medical field to looking at farmers' criteria behind what does constitute a low value practice. And that's where the checklist comes in, because you have to talk about it. This means that we actually have to engage in conversations with people around the table. And then we start to look at, is this a formal de-implementation? What are the next steps that we can take?
That's really interesting. It makes me think about, okay, especially decluttering. I'm sure I'm not the only one in here who during the pandemic thought about what things can I remove that don't bring me joy anymore. Right now is not a time to really focus on those things. And so it sounds like to me, de-implementation is really a process that you can do individually, right, to remove things from your practices and processes. But how do you start to align and scale that to like a system wide? How do you make sure that people are aligned on and having those conversations, aligning on what is a low value practice system wide?
I think that's a fantastic question, because that's certainly what I've had to look at. I think sometimes for me, I always have the grassroots effort mentality. Like when I was a school principal, it was, let's start with a pilot group and let's do this from a grassroots effort and see how it grows. So typically that's my go-to when I'm working with people. I'll say, you know what, if you're uncomfortable with this, or if this is a new topic for you, then maybe what you need to do is start individually. And yesterday, a lot of my work is hybrid work. So I'll work with organizations, but I'll work with them in person like 4 or 5 times during the year, and then remote virtually the other months. So Hawaii, I work on the Big Island of Hawaii. And in the complex that I was working with, we actually just had this discussion yesterday, because I introduced them they were talking about their academic plans for next year. And I introduced them to the concept of a not to-do list. So what it really would mean is, what is the focus of your academic plan? And then start to think about, what is the success criteria there? Whenever I'm running a workshop, whenever I'm coaching, I always send out success criteria ahead of time. I actually just sent out a few because I have keynotes coming up. So I sent out a letter to participants with the success criteria that I'm going to be focusing on. And then I asked them, please consider your own success criteria. Why are you coming to the professional learning? What are you hoping to learn from me? And then we use an online engagement tool that's anonymous, and they can put their success criteria into it. And then I utilize that throughout the whole day. So what I was talking about with the group yesterday was, you've got your academic plan, you've got your priority list, things like absenteeism, or we have to focus on literacy because their literacy rate the proficiency rate is not high. So that's your focus. Now tell me what the success criteria is. What would a successful implementation look like when you're talking about these kind of things? That's something we don't often do. We jump into it. And one of the things I talk about in de-implementation is, why do we over-implement in the first place? And sometimes it's because it's thin content in nice packaging. It looks really great, and this is going to be the next thing that's going to save us, and then it's not. So when you develop that success criteria to say, what would success look like if we did this correctly? And then what evidence could we collect to make sure we're impactful? But the next thing to look at is, what's the not to-do list? What are the things you're presently doing right now that you need to knock off your list? And it's as simple as, when I'm working with individual leaders and coaching, they may calendar their time for a week or two. I'm a big fan of, I've got a running journal because I'm a long distance runner and I bike. I like to track my mileage. I have the Lose It app because the picture you have of me, I should have corrected, that was 45 pounds ago. I use the Lose It app. So tracking my stuff is really important because it helps me be more aware of what I'm putting in my mouth or how I'm exercising or something like that. So calendaring your time is a really easy way to start to look at, where do I spend my time? How do I spend my time? What are the things that are actually distractions and not things that actually help become more impactful? And I'll give you an idea. When I was, and I think de-implementation is something people have been doing for years, they just didn't know what to call it. When I was a school principal, I was fairly new, and I went to every classroom every morning to say good morning to the kids. And I just remember over and over again, the two union reps would stop me in the hallway, and I love them. I still talk to them, but they would stop me in the hallway, and I kept thinking, why am I getting so mad at the fact that people are stopping me in the hallway? Like, I'm the principal, isn't this part of my gig? Then I realized, because it's forcing me to be reactive and not proactive. Because if they're stopping me in the hallway, the reason why I'm getting uncomfortable is because it means I can't get into the classroom. So there's this opportunity cost. So after a few weeks, I actually said to them, you know what? We seem to have a lot to talk about. So could you meet with me on Friday morning? We're all here early. I knew they were here early. We could meet on Friday morning for an hour before the kids come in. And they said, you would meet with us? I'm like, yeah, I think that would be fantastic. So they came in and we met every Friday. And many times we didn't talk about union issues. We ended up talking about bigger things that were happening in education at the time. But what I found is that when I was walking through the hallway in the morning to go say good morning to the kids, if they stopped me, I could say, is this a crisis or is this something that can wait until Friday morning? They're like, oh, it can totally wait till Friday morning. Yeah. What that meant is that I went from being reactive to proactive. We had a Friday morning meeting where we could talk about these issues, and I no longer got stopped in the hallway, and I could make it into classrooms every morning to do my morning rounds, which became part of the culture. And in the long run, what I found too is that across the district, my name and our school would not come up in the K-12 union conversations. And when the two union reps were asked, why aren't you bringing up Peter's name and what's going on at the school? They said, well, Peter meets with us on Friday mornings, so we really don't have any issues to bring here. That's what I'm thinking of. And that's what I was thinking of when it comes to de-implementation. It's when you're going through something and you feel like, oh, why is this getting in the way of what I really want to do? How can I be more proactive? When you calendar your time and you're really honest about how you spend your time and you're not judging yourself. I do a lot of meditation. I believe in non-judgment. We're not judging ourselves about how we're spending our time. We're just spending our time writing it down and looking, and then starting to go back to say, what are the things that are actually most impactful in a positive way to teachers and students? How can I spend more time doing those things? Because we often think we're like chained to our desk and we have to check email and all this stuff. I remember having a conversation with my superintendent and I said, If you call me and I answer the phone in my office every time you call me, that's a problem because it means I'm not in the classroom. So sometimes we even have to, like, I'll ask people, put a calendar link in that says, get up, get out of your office. And I do that with teachers on special assignment, instructional coaches, principals, because it gives them the permission that we somehow need to get up and move on. That's what de-implementation is all about. That's an informal, where you can start to look and say, I calendared my time. I know what's impactful. I know the things that are not impactful. What ones can I actually start to suspend or partially reduce? And I hope I just gave a plethora of examples where that's concerned.
I love that. And there's a lot of great stuff here I want to ask you about. One thing is I'm wondering, as people are on this process to take things off their plates, right, or really shift the focus to what matters and assessing that or reflecting on the time that's being spent, is there like that kind of push and pull between doing a little bit more to take things off, right? Like you mentioned meetings, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who has been about a meeting.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
So tell
Oh,
me,
yeah.
like, how's that push and pull, and how do you kind of like accommodate or facilitate those conversations with folks who are trying to push that work forward, but feel like they have to do a lot to do that?
Yeah, I think that comes into play, and it's an excellent question. I think that comes into play more when it comes to formal de-implementation, because I have worked with groups and I've had people say, this seems like a lot of work. I'm like, it actually, in the long run, won't be, because what it means that you have to do is you have to look at your meetings in the first place. Believe me, I work in a lot of districts with a lot of organizations, and they want me to work with their school principals on being instructional leaders. And then I go to the district office meetings and they're talking at the principals. There's no dialogue whatsoever. They're talking at, not with. And what I'm asking people to do is stop talking at each other. I wrote a book on collective leader efficacy, strengthening instructional leadership teams, that came out before the de-implementation book, but it's where I started to mention de-implementation, because we need to get into a space where we're not judging each other, where we're building the skills to be in a collective, where we're actually challenging each other's thinking. And that's the kind of space that we need to be able to look at. Now let's start talking about, and it's quite simple. If we're going to bring something into our building, what are we going to take off of our plate? And having those kind of discussions are not difficult. It's another reason why I created the checklist. And it's one of the reasons why I wrote the book. Through those conversations, I find that leaders are modeling some pretty important things for teachers to hear, because sometimes we're our own worst enemies, where we believe that they want us to work really late, or all of those kind of things. And what a leader has the opportunity to do is model the discussion about less is more. Mm-hmm. I don't want you to do a plethora of things. I want us to start talking about what is giving us the most impact. And that could look different depending on what school it is. The whole conversation about this is really to focus on what are we doing that is most impactful, and what can we get rid of that won't be impactful. The meeting space is a perfect opportunity. I'm tired of meetings where people show up and they don't even know why they're there. I've worked with countless K-12 teams, high school teams, and I've actually asked, so what's your role on the team? And I've had more than you could imagine. People say to me in public or in private, Peter, I've been on this team for 2 years and I don't even know why I'm here. Mm-hmm. That's a horrible thing to do to people. That's why I send a letter out before I'm going to give a keynote or run a workshop, because people are coming, and I can guarantee you there are a lot of people in the room that don't know why they're there. So when we're looking at your question about, is this going to be more work? I think it is at the beginning going to be more work, because it's going to force leaders into a conversation that they don't normally have, which I help them with. And, if you don't want the book, there are podcasts on it, there are articles. I write for Ed Week, I've written there. It's going to force you into a conversation to start talking about, what does impact look like? And what is most impactful with what we're doing? And then start thinking about, what are those things that we can start to take off our plate. And at the beginning, I told you, part of what makes this difficult is using that online engagement tool. I surveyed thousands of teachers and leaders when I was doing the de-implementation work, or I was starting to do the de-implementation research. And I started to notice what I love about coaching and facilitating is I'm learning when I'm there. Like, this is not Peter coming in and teaching you something. There's a reciprocal transfer where I'm learning from you as well. And one of the things that I started to notice, which also is part of your question, is that 100% of the time, which rarely is the case, 100% of the time, I noticed that the things people said they would de-implement, that they would abandon, were all things that they thought were being done to them, not things that were doing themselves. So they're spending a lot of time saying, I would get rid of this, this, and this, because they feel like they have no control over it, and it's coming down to them. And it happened all the time. And it wasn't until, I mean, we're talking like a couple of months into it that I'm looking at all the data, and I was like, oh, these are all things they don't control. Wow. What about what you control? What about what you have influence over? There's a research paper from 2000 from Helen Timperley and Vivian Robinson out of New Zealand. And I sit on an advisory board with Helen Timperley in Australia, and Vivian's somebody who's written books and that I've edited for my publisher. And they're brilliant. Like, if you don't know Helen Timperley and Vivian Robinson, look them up. And they wrote a paper in 2000 that said the workload has increased among teachers and leaders in the past 30 years. So since 1970. So what this really means is our workload has increased for the past 52 years, because there's a lot of research to show that it's increased from 2000. But one of the things that they said was, the problem is we contribute to our own workload in ways more than those top-down things do. Meaning that sometimes we are our worst enemy, because we are actually looking at implementing something new in our classroom or our school, but we're not getting rid of anything else. And that's why one of the reasons why I talk about over-implementation is emotions over evidence. I like doing it. I like doing this with the kids. Doesn't mean it has impact, but I like doing it. I like doing this as a school principal. But does it have impact? And is it really worth your time? So those are things that the nuances of all of this that you have to start unpacking, which is another reason why I put that checklist in, because it helps guide through those kind of conversations to say, so where would we like to start? Right. What is a distraction? If this is our plan for next year, if this is what we're going to focus on for next year, then what is our success criteria? What does success look like? And then start to look at, what are the distractions? What are the things that we should put on a not to-do list, because they're starting to get in the way? And sometimes that means we have to be open and honest about the things we like as much as the things we don't like. Did that answer your question? I feel like that was a really long answer.
No, it's great. And I think so we've got a question here from a principal that I think will feel relevant. And Kim from San Juan School District asked, how do you make sure that, right, you keep these most important things going? Like, you've identified them, you reflected, we know what the hard work is that's going to provide results or produce results. But you've got these outside factors in. Recently, parents, right? And a ton of other outside factors. So, like, how do you help communicate? Even we've got our internal plans, we're all aligned, but communicate that we are making changes as a campus, as a district, and really trying to prioritize what's important and shift that focus for people who aren't a part of that conversation.
So and that's an excellent question, Kim, because this is something that I went through as a school principal. I started as a school principal in 2006. And one of the things that I started was a blog. And this was like when blogs were brand new. And I started the blog because I wanted parents to be able to go to a place where they could understand my thinking. I wanted to be open and honest about, why am I making the changes? Because part of why you get pushback is because we don't communicate well. People don't understand why they're there. I mean, we make assumptions that people know and they don't. If you asked me 5 years ago, Peter, are you really intentional when you're running workshops? I'm like, yeah, I'm totally intentional. I have been much more intentional in the past 2 years than ever before because of experiences I've had where people don't know. So I started a blog in 2006, and I would write about why I did what I did because I wanted people to be able to go there and see my level of thinking. That actually cut down on some of the pushback right away, like 50% of the pushback, because people looked at it and said, oh, that totally makes sense. Huge example that I'll never forget. I changed the parent pickup door. Whoo! You would have thought that
Right.
because where they used to go had an awning over it and they could, stand there in line and get their kid. The reason I changed it is because our buses were going through and kids were running away from their parents out in front of buses. And after sending home 3 letters to say, when you're picking up your kids, please make sure you're holding their hand and all this stuff. We've got buses. They didn't do it. And I thought, I'm done. So I moved the parent pickup door to the end of the school where there wasn't an awning. And I had some parents who were very upset with me because they said, what if it snows? And I'm like, I have an obvious answer for this, but I don't think I should use it, right?
Right.
They actually said, what if it's raining? I'm like, we've got umbrellas. But I wrote a blog about it because I thought I need to explain that I'm worried about the safety of the kids because kids are running in front of buses.
Right.
So after I did that, I had parents that said, oh, I totally get it. And it went down. What I've also noticed, and I think Kim's question is a good one, is that I also noticed that I used to think I was a really good communicator as a principal, and I realized I wasn't. We communicate in 3 ways. We give information. Here are the important dates that you need to know. The second one is that we're supposed to engage in dialogue, parent-teacher conferences, open house, but we don't. We usually just talk at people. The third one is a focus on learning. We're supposed to actually engage families so they understand what learning looks like within our school. So a few years into my leadership, one of the things that I did was that I started flipping communication. Like I flipped faculty meetings with my staff where we would focus on feedback and then they would bring evidence and we would talk about it. And I gave them an article that they had to read ahead of time. So therefore, those people that didn't know a lot about feedback could gain an understanding. I realized I needed to do the same thing with families. So before open house one year, I created a video, and it was before you could get videos on your phone, where I spoke for 5 minutes and just said, you know what, open house is coming up next Thursday. You're going to be meeting with me in the gymnasium for 30 minutes before you go to your child's new teacher. We have 2 huge initiatives coming to our school, the Common Core State Standards and the Dignity for All Students Act. Please come to open house and talk with me. Ask me questions about what you have. And then I also sent a letter home within 30 minutes of sending out the video through the parent portal, where we only had about 60% of the parents sign up. I started getting emails from people saying, Peter, this is really great. I can't wait to talk to you. And are you going to keep doing this kind of stuff? And I went to open house and it was standing room only. We never talked about the Common Core, but we talked about the Dignity for All Students Act. And we engaged in like Q&A and all that stuff. What I also started to realize is we talk at parents at report card to them. Here's the new Common Core report card. Do you have any questions? Well, of course they don't have questions. They are just getting it in front of them. So I started, like I would send a letter out a week ahead of time with the report card, send it to parents and say, we want to give you time to process the information on the report card. We want to give you time to consider some questions that you might ask. Here are some questions that often come up in report card time. Maybe you would like to use one of these when you go to meet with your child's new teacher. The bottom line with Kim is the pushback. What you need to find out is, how am I communicating in the first place? And then in what ways can I have an open discussion about why we're getting rid of some of the things that we're getting rid of and why we're engaging in some of the things we're engaging in. And then I used to send home videos. It was probably once every week and a half. This is the day in the life of your child at school. And they would just see what we were engaged in. We were a professional development school with a local university. We used to work with the Albany Symphony Orchestra. Like, there were so many cool things going on and so much great teaching, but the parents didn't know that. So I wanted to actually open up those walls so they could see what they look like. And it was no accident that within our school district, which I got to tell you, it was very conservative, and there were people that were known. We had a couple of board members that actually actively told the community to vote down the budget. So that's what I'm trying to, and the budget would pass and they would look at the highest percentages. Where did the yes votes come from? The highest percentages of yes votes for a school budget came from my school. And I think it was because parents I don't think it was me. I think it was the fact that we had a really special relationship where we actually collaborated together. It wasn't just me talking at them. It was me explaining why we were doing what we were doing, but also collaborating. And I think that they really believed in the school, and that's what helped to make it work. So I'm hoping that answered the question.
Definitely. I think so. I mean, I think always like getting very, very clear about what you're communicating, because over communication, I'd love to de-implement that as well. I'd love to declutter communication in general, as well. That's
Well,
great.
we actually did. I'm glad you said that, Selena, because I had a great secretary. Her name was Donna, fiery redhead. She was a New York Yankees fan, and she had Yankees stuff all over the office, which 50% of the faculty didn't like because they were Boston Red Sox fans. But I remember we used to send home a 5-page newsletter every month. Nobody read it. It was in the bottom of a backpack. It was on the floor. It was on a bus. And when I started to flip the communication, I remember standing in the office during the summer with Donna, and I said, the way I see it is that if I'm sending home the video, and we saw an increase in the people signing up for the parent portal, I said, if I'm sending home the video, then we can shorten the newsletter. And she goes, 1 page, you get 1 page. And when Donna said you get 1 page, you listen. And I said, let's call it the refrigerator page. And we literally called it the refrigerator page. People were putting it on the refrigerator. She got fewer phone calls. That's de-implementation. I partially reduced the newsletter from 5, which was a load of time for Donna, to 1 page. To make it simple, it was more impactful because people actually read 1 page as opposed to 5. And I used the video as a way to engage. And one of the impacts of the video is I had people that would come in, and we're in a very rural area. And I had people that came in and they actually said to me, you know, Dr. Dewitt, I've seen your videos and you don't seem very intimidating. So I knew I could come in to talk to you. And I'm like, apparently I'm not intimidating in a video. But one of the things that I found, which was one of those anecdotal pieces, was that the more they saw a video with me talking through it with pictures of the kids, the more they got used to my voice and the more they got used to me, and they actually came into school. So there were a few things that happened there. We could shrink the number of pages in the newsletter. I could create the video, but it also became more of an engagement tool because parents actually would watch the video and feel like, I could go in and talk to that guy. He's not too scary, right? And it actually lowered my status as a school principal and raised the status of the people who would come in to talk to me about any issue that they were facing.
Yeah, I love that. I think we've got a lot of people who definitely want to ask you some more questions about more concrete examples that you're doing to do this. So we are actually going to move into some breakout rooms where we can open up the conversation for folks. So Peter and myself and a few others will be in one room, and then my colleague Javier and one of our good friends from Lubbock ISD will be speaking as well. And then we'll do some switching off before coming back all together to close out. So I will go ahead and let our team go ahead and split us up.
Selena, I think I'll close it out and just say thank you all so much for joining today. Thank you, Peter, Selena, Javier, Misty. What I loved about the breakout conversations is that we were able to blend both the mindset shift of de-implementation and then some of the actual operational shifts that a school district can make when it comes to doing less and focusing on what matters. So thank you all so much for your engagement. 2 housekeeping notes. One is we will send this recording as a follow-up for any colleagues that might be interested in it, or if you might be interested in it. And secondly, we wouldn't be practicing what we preach if we didn't ask for your feedback. So in the chat, my colleague Julia will share out a link to a survey. Oh, it looks like a live survey here. And then we'll also send this as an email follow-up. We would love to hear what your feedback is and what we can improve on the next time that we have a conversation like this. So thank you all again for participating. Take a few moments to reflect on this experience and think about what you're taking from it. And we will look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.